So thank you everybody for joining us. This has been a topic that Chris and I have wanted to teach for a while now. We have spent the last couple years in a big part of the market that has been really the investment sectors of the market. And we've seen a lot of revitalization, a lot of homes getting renovated and resold. And we wanted to share with you some of the inside knowledge that we've learned along the way, some of the common pitfalls, some things to kind of be aware of for your buyer and seller clients if you're representing them in those areas, or just in general.
And just to touch on the areas that we've been all over, but the main areas we've been in are Southern Orchards, for any of you that are familiar with that. It's down by Children's Hospital, south of Livingston, Old Oaks, which is in that same area. I mean, I personally, Old Town East. I've learned about areas that I didn't know what Southern Orchards was. I just knew it was southeast.
We've done some work in Franklinton and on the west side.
Hilltop. So those sorts of areas where there's a lot of investment going on.
Right. So I'm going to go ahead and present my screen so everybody can see our PowerPoint. Let's see.
Everybody see that?
Okay. Awesome. So let's get started. So a little bit about Chris and I. For those of you that I don't know, I think I know pretty much everyone on this call so far, or this meeting so far. So I was licensed in 2015. I'm with Millennium Group. I teach some of the negotiation classes in the Market Center. That's kind of a fun topic for me. And then a few just little accolades. I was 10 under 40. I think currently I'm at a $10 million award winner. I was the salesperson nominee for 2020. And I have been in the Central Ohio area my whole life. I grew up out by Millersport, Buckeye Lake, and I've been living in Columbus since after college. So I've been in and around the whole city, feels like. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I've been licensed since the beginning of 2014. I think realistically, my license was the end of December 13, but I started in 14 with CAP Partners at that time. I've been here since. Also got licensed in Florida in 2017. I keep my professional engineering license that I did I did that for about 25 years, ran an engineering firm. So I keep that active as well. So a lot of classes for those three things. I think I just hit the 5 million. I'm also in the Millennium Group, and we have people that take care of that. So I don't know. I think I did, or I wouldn't have probably done it, but they do all the paperwork for us on that. So, and then I saw Rachel had that 10 under 40. So I was business first when I was doing engineering, 40 under 40, but I didn't put a date because that was like forever ago. And then also born and raised in Columbus, grew up here in south of here in Clintonville, moved to Grandview. Went away to college, came back, so I've been all over, mostly northwest.
Okay, so some of the things that we're going to talk about today or touch on today are what is a community reinvestment area. So we know that there are areas or pockets of the city that tend to be really hot with the investment sector of the market. So kind of identifying what the city determines are those community reinvestment areas, what you need to know when listing homes in these areas, what you need to know when representing buyers purchasing in these areas, and then providing some additional resources. So there are a ton of resources for you guys as agents to utilize just to be educated on the areas, but also provide value to your buyers and sellers and make sure that you're doing your due diligence on behalf of your clients, depending on what side that you're on. So we're going to provide some additional resources that you guys have to reference moving forward as tools in your practice.
Just a quick caveat on that. That's key because the stuff is changing. I mean, it's set, but it's being updated. With COVID right now, there's some changes and restrictions on how things are being approved. So always checking in on those resources is key to make sure you're getting the latest.
Yep. And I just want to take a moment to ask you guys, why you're here and what topics you would like to discuss. We want to make sure that we bring value to everybody on this call. We have our agenda, but we want to make sure that we answer your questions as well. So is there any particular reasons that you're here or anything that you would particularly like to know?
I want to know everything you know.
Agreed.
I'll do my best.
But we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, right?
That's right. And I don't know what you know, so I can't wait to find out what that is.
Okay, awesome. Anybody else?
Yeah, there's a
Maybe some
lot
of the
of,
misconceptions.
yeah, there's a lot of first-time home buyers gravitating towards that southern orchard. And I kind of want to know where the investments are going to be placed for these kids, because I've got my own children would like to purchase somewhere down in that area, and I'm not real comfortable in some of those areas. And I just here to kind of focus on what's going to be the wise investment for them.
This I think will be really helpful, especially since it's personal, since you have kids looking in those areas and what to kind of be on the lookout for. So great. Okay.
I'm kind of ditto on that, Ruthie Porteous. And my cell phone, I can't, for some reason, my video and sound is blocked. So I got on my computer. We bought a place on Thurman Avenue, just lucked out. A friend, it must have been 2008, and he was in a bad spot. He was like, "Will you be my realtor for $1,400 or $1,200?" And I'm like, "Yeah." It's a friend from college I'd known 30 years. So I just went to help him out. And then I'm sitting there like, we should buy this. So we did. And it's right in the heart of German Village, and across were shops that were empty.
Okay.
And that's where Fox in the Snow moved in, and the nail shop and all of that. So that place has been awesome. We just rented out, and you know, people can't wait to be in there. But we also bought on South High Street with 2 properties there, renovating one. But honestly, I'll be honest, and I went and looked 2 years ago at South Orchards on, there's like pockets of really good streets, but and the house that sold for like 220 and on Ohio. It was on Ohio. That's like, so I'm interested in seeing what you have there. But that area, again, along with the other woman, really scares me. We have a friend who went to Harvard, and he, like 5 years ago or 4 years ago, was like, read this one book. And it really says that that area is one of the east of Parsons, is one of the highest. It was like the #1 place for human trafficking in the United States. I go to the Ace Hardware store on High Street every once in a while to pick something up, or to get, not High Street, but Parsons. And I noticed one day this man standing on the corner. I saw a cord. I looked, there was like a lady standing up there, and I'm like, they are casing a place. And then I was back the next day, and the FBI or the DEA was in, and they had, and this was just like last spring, raided a place. So,
Well, I think I can even, at some point when we get to it, I can tell you, because I actually just helped a client, Amy, that originally started looking there, and I can kind of walk you through the progression of how that went.
awesome. I'll go ahead. Thank you so much. I'm just curious what you have to
I think
say.
it's talking about really what the opportunity of those areas are. Usually when you're getting into an area where you're going to have good opportunity for an investment or appreciation over time, sometimes it might not be, you know, the most up and came area. So we'll touch on the differences of how the city kind of delineates between some of these communities and distress circumstances. So,
Well, and I would even say too, we, you know, as realtors, family's one thing, but we have to be careful too on fair housing. We can't steer
Right.
people away from areas that say they're interested based on their personal opinions, which we're allowed to have, but how we project that and what we say professionally, I guess, as realtors, we just want to be
and I
careful.
think
So
that's
there's ways to walk through that too.
And I think that's by knowing the resources
Yeah.
and being able to provide and direct clients to the resources the city provides, getting you out of that personal opinion conversation, and allowing them the right tools to do their due diligence to see if it's going to be the right fit.
And that's why I want to walk you through the example that I have, because that's kind of how I handle
So
it.
are you saying that you're going to give us some of those resources
Yes.
as we go through? Good.
And I'll kind of let you know how my conversations go based on how things are ranked as well. Okay, so first things first, what is a community reinvestment area? So a community reinvestment area are the areas of land in which property owners can receive tax incentives for investing in real property improvements. So these are the areas that the city has determined are worth allowing certain tax incentives or financial benefits to investors in order to get people to reinvest in these areas, revitalize these areas. At one point, they were kind of forgotten spots of the city.
Right.
So really rejuvenating a lot of these downtown communities. Now we see community reinvestment area and opportunity zone be used pretty interchangeably,
Right.
and they are two very different things. So the CRA is really the local initiative through the city of Columbus. And their purpose or their principle is to provide housing abatement policies to foster private sector investments to build mixed income neighborhoods. So a lot of these distressed neighborhoods, it's their local incentive to kind of get them back up to speed. Now, opportunity zone, while some of these CRA areas within the local city do cross over or fall into an opportunity zone is actually a federal term. And it's what the United States government has deemed essentially areas within the country that allow for certain people to invest in these distressed areas to spur economic growth, job creation in low-income communities, and tax incentives to investors. So we see those kind of get used pretty interchangeably, even though they are different things and they provide different benefits.
One of the big differentiators I see too with the CRA is what you touched on there at the end. It's to build that mixed income neighborhood. And you'll see as we get into this, we'll talk about, you know, when gentrification happens to a neighborhood, a lot of times prices and everything go up and it forces people that live there to move out. Right. And the whole intent of the CRA process is to not make that happen.
Right. It's to provide an incentive to, like you said, mixed income, bring the area back up to speed or bring some new homeowners into the area, houses that were lost or left or vacated.
But without forcing others out.
Right. Without.
And we'll talk about that when you get into the tax abatement stuff.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, so where are the City of Columbus CRAs? So the City of Columbus has ranked areas in 3 tiers, and they've deemed them market ready, ready for revitalization, or ready for opportunity. And they've also identified 6 distress criteria in order to measure and allocate the right status for these areas within the city. So some of the things that the city has looked at would be population growth. So are these areas growing in population or density, or are they diminishing? Median household income growth. So again, is the household income increasing or decreasing in certain areas?
And how is it versus the average of other parts?
Right.
So they can see if it is a distressed area.
Yeah, how is it in comparison to some of the other parts around the city? Poverty rate, growth in median rent. So are rental rates increasing or decreasing? Housing vacancy rates. So are people moving into these areas or moving out of these areas? And then mortgage foreclosure rate. So are people maintaining their homes, staying in their homes, owner occupying, or are they losing their homes based on some of these other factors?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So with that being said, they using all of those things to figure this out. With COVID, are you going to talk about how that's affected this? Because there's no foreclosures, they can't, I mean, everything's changing. So is that something new that we need to be aware of, or?
So the city will reevaluate every few years, I think every 3 years.
Right.
Okay.
And in fact, I talked to Michelle Castro Giovanni, who's the head of this department, and she said they're actually scheduled to be meeting sometime this year still, later in the year. So every 3 years, they reevaluate the criteria and the areas.
So that's probably
yeah,
gonna-
I definitely see COVID's going to have an impact on it. But right now, they've already established what the CRAs are, and that was based on pre-COVID. So
Yep. These statuses here that we see for market ready, and if you look, so market ready, those are areas that have no more than 1 distress criteria. So to me, when we're looking at investments or investment opportunities, these are areas that there's very little opportunity at this point for that great appreciation, things like that, but they're still eligible for certain tax incentives if you do find an opportunity. But these are the areas that have already been a little bit more developed. So Short North, Fifth by Northwest. I mean, we know, look at Short North High Street, maybe 20 years ago, because this act came, the community reinvestment areas were determined in 1994. So they've been working on this since the mid 90s. So in the mid 90s, Fifth by Northwest or Short North wasn't quite what it is today.
Well, and like Carol and others that have, been in real estate for a while, you've seen this with not only Short North, but then like, look at Old Town East, Old Town East, back when the 07, 08, that was getting transitioned and built up, and there was all kinds of opportunity there. Now that's pretty much been done, and there's still opportunity there, but it takes time. And so some of these that are listed now, although now they might seem a little concerning or too transitional for someone to be comfortable, the intent is down the road, it's gonna, it may be 5-10 years before we see that.
And so this is kind of how, as they reassess these areas, they've moved some of these areas up a tier. So at some point, Short North or Fifth by Northwest might have been ready for opportunity areas, where now they're market ready. So the tax incentives are going to look a little bit different, probably not as many, right? Or not as tax friendly, providing as much incentive to the investors to be in these areas and spend their capital there. Ready for revitalization, this is really the biggest pocket that we have seen as far as revitalization and development in the city in the last few years, at least from where we're working. So on the west side, they've identified that these have 2 to 4 distress criteria. So of this list on the left, we're hitting about 2 to 4 of these. So they're kind of in that middle range. They've seen some revitalization, but they're not quite where the city wants them. So they're still providing some great incentives for people to buy, renovate, reinvest, develop in these areas. So that would be west side on the hilltop, east side, Livingston and James, Milo Grogan, the near east side, north central, south side. So south side is technically within like Southern Orchards, 43206. Near east side is kind of like 43205. There are some little pockets on the other side of Bexley, Whitehall, those type of areas. And then Wyland Park. And then ready for opportunity, those are really the areas that the city is deemed like the most distressed based on this criteria. And so these are the ones that tend to have the most tax incentives to invest in these communities. So they've identified Franklinton and Linden. Now Linden on the map is what, south of Weber?
Yeah, they're saying.
So North Linden doesn't fall within this pocket, is what I'm getting
it's more,
at.
Yeah.
It's more central south.
Linden, from 71 over to Cleveland and just east of Cleveland Avenue.
Right.
And then Weber down to.
And I'll give you guys a visual map. So this is how the city has ranked kind of those tiers based on distress criteria and where we're seeing most of the revitalization. And from a map perspective, but for the visual people, there you go.
Where am I? What? Okay.
So from a map perspective, the green areas are really those market ready areas. The blue, which you see is majority of the revitalization zones that we're working in or we're helping first time home buyers purchase in, investors purchase in, have been these blue zones. So you'll see we're kind of like on the other side of Bexley a little bit, south.
Where is your map? I'm sorry. I'm just seeing you guys and.
Huh?
Where are you showing that?
What do you mean?
The map you're talking about?
Oh, you can't see it?
You can't see our PowerPoint?
No, I don't. But I switched computers like after I first joined.
Okay, we are presenting our screen.
Carol,
so,
can you see it? Can you see the map? Everyone can see it?
I can see it.
That setting on.
Maybe go up to the right side of your screen and you're going to see where it says it's got like a line, a box, 2 boxes, a whole bunch of boxes. Click on that.
Yeah, you might want to look at the presenter or the speaker. There's one that says show speaker view or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry.
And then you'll see the yellow areas are those ready for opportunity areas, which are here. So when we have conversations with our clients, this is a really great tool to use. When you talk about, where we want to focus, what the opportunities are. So when we're talking with our investment clients, or just our first time home buyers, or people that are a little bit more risk tolerant to these areas, want to live in the city, want to be close to certain things or amenities, want the opportunity to build some appreciation in an up and coming area that tends to be pretty trendy right now. This is one of the tools that we use. So we direct them to some of the city resources, and that removes us from that conversation and say, okay, this is how the city has ranked these areas.
Right.
Market ready is here, ready for revitalization is here in the middle, and this is what we're seeing. And then ready for opportunity as well. So from a risk perspective, to me, market ready is very low risk.
Right.
As far as living or purchasing or whatever that looks like. Ready for revitalization is a little bit more risky in regards to it probably hasn't been around very long. So we know Southern Orchards has really had to come up in the last few years. Before then, not so much. So, you know, it's new. It hasn't had enough sustainability. It hasn't had enough time to really know, is it going to stick? Is it going to stay? But that ready for revitalization, those are areas that we've really seen a lot of improvement in a short amount of time. And you can tell when you drive through there. If you drove through there 3-4 years ago, there were 10 boarded up houses, 1 nice house. Now there's 10 nice houses, 1 boarded up house.
And that's exactly, so when I'm talking to clients, instead of using risky, I typically will say more transitional or less transitional. And then I'll use that exact description and say, you know, Old Town East back in 07, 08, you might see 2 or 3 out of every 5 boarded up or now you might see 1 out of every 5.
Okay.
When you get to Southern Orchards, you're going to see an increase in how many are boarded up. So I think that's important. So you're kind of letting them see that for themselves when you direct them there and let them pay attention to those sorts of things without actually using words like telling them it's riskier. Or,
Yeah.
But I do like using that it's got more opportunity for long-term growth in some of those areas.
Right.
So yeah, there is a risk in that. Are you going to see the return? Well, anytime you want higher return, you take more risk.
Right.
So,
And then those ready for opportunity areas, those are the ones that the city has deemed kind of the most distressed areas. So those ones have the most opportunity for improvement, which also means that they're probably the least improved areas of the city thus far.
well, and I'll give an example there where we talked about South Linden. I invest and have investors in North Linden primarily, and well, I call it Clintonville East now, but North Linden is not part of the opportunity zone. But I see more and more south of Weber selling 100,000, north of 100,000, and you know, 5 years ago you could buy for 20 grand down there. So obviously, somebody might say that's riskier, but the upside potential is higher.
And so allowing your clients or your first time home buyers to see how the city kind of identifies these areas, what they have determined these categories are, I think is what allows us to have a conversation with them to say, okay, well, here's what the information is, and here's how we translate that, and we let them make their decision. I always encourage people to drive around as well. And you can get a feel for different areas. And like I think, Ruth, that you were talking about pockets, or I mean, you're going to know there's different streets that have had some more revitalization than others, or what pockets around the city people have focused on more than others. And that's really that due diligence, like get out there, go see what that looks like.
Well, Southern Orchards is a good example. The closer you are to Nationwide, so the northwest quadrant of Southern Orchards that's walkable to Nationwide, you see a ton of investment in revitalization. You get to that southeast corner where now you're driving everywhere. You're not really going to walk to the hospital. There's less, I mean, it's happening, but it's creeping that way slower.
Right.
So that's where you can direct people not only to Southern Orchards, but then pockets within Southern Orchards.
Well, then also knowing what's happening in your city. You guys are selling real estate here. So how is Nationwide developing? How many jobs are they bringing on? What is the economic support in these areas that help us understand if it's the right time to buy a house here or not? We know that there's a ton of economic development and growth, whether it's the trolley barn south of Franklin Park, that's a $32 million project. What Nationwide expansion plan is. I mean, Nationwide really instigated the Southern Orchard's kind of boom with their healthy home initiative, where they were coming in and they were buying properties, they were renovating properties for owner occupants who also, the intention was for people that also worked at Nationwide to have somewhere close to work to live.
Right.
And those were all tax abated properties.
And now they've gotten out of doing that themselves,
Right.
but they've created that ball rolling. Now they offer incentives to employees to live within a certain radius of the hospital. So again, they're trying to continue that with a more hands-off approach, let other investors do the investing instead of themselves.
I think educating yourselves on like what the actual development plans are, what the where bigger companies are growing and developing and putting their businesses is really what's going to help drive a lot of this upswing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Tax abatement. Some of the agents on this call may know what a tax abatement is, some may not. And then do you guys know of any new ones coming up or currently in existence? Oh, look at that.
I read your mind. Okay.
Well, thank you. Sorry.
So I wanted to identify the areas in which the city, these things are eligible for. And then tax abatement wise, let's talk about that. So we've all seen probably on listings down there that tax abatement's eligible or it's in a tax abatement eligible zone. So tax abatement and the tax benefit is basically property owners will continue to pay existing taxes on the property prior to the improvements. So that value before. So say you buy a house for $80,000, you put $120,000 into it. It's now a $250,000 house. If you apply for tax abatement and you get the tax benefit, you will be paying taxes on the $80,000 value.
For 15 years or 10
10 to
years.
15 years, depending on
the zone.
the city zone. Now, this has to be a substantial improvement because they're wanting to see large improvements for homes that have been left behind in these areas. So you usually have to make a substantial improvement to these properties, which is okay. And that's the benefit to potentially the next owner. It's a good opportunity for a buyer moving into the area that can get a tax abated home or the opportunity of a tax abated home or that tax benefit. So they're going to be, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, and this is where I was talking on too, trying to not gentrify and force people out, because typically in an area where you don't have that tax abatement, taxes go up. Well, then people that have lived there 10 years, theirs get drawn up as well. And then they might get forced out of their home. Right. Now it's keeping those taxes for 15 years at that level. So if somebody is living next door, they lived there their whole life, they're not doing improvements, their house isn't worth 250. They're not now having to pay taxes on 150 because their value got increased automatically. It stays at the 80 that their house is worth. So it lets them stay in the neighborhood and in their home and see some of that growth around them.
So in here, and this came from the city. So in here it says a builder of new homes will not get the tax benefit. All benefits go to the owner of the property. There are some areas where new construction or development is eligible for tax abatement. So I just wanted to note that. And then the neighbors, and really it's so that the neighborhood and the school can also benefit from the increased activity, property values, etc. in these areas. What they don't want to do is do 100% tax abatement on the whole value, and then that impacts the local community a little bit more with the schools and everything. So really it's on that improved value only. And then property tax exemptions are based on the increased valuation of the property, again, due to significant improvements. So if you update a kitchen or a bathroom, they're probably not going to give you a tax abatement. If you fully renovate a property, then it's going to be more eligible. So there are community reinvestment area tax incentive applications, and they consist of a 2-phase application process. There's phase 1, which is pre-construction, and phase 2, which is post-construction. And then both applications have to be submitted during the application process for the tax abatement to be eligible. And you have to go through all of the steps of that. And tax incentives are different for each category. So I'm actually going to pull up the city, let's see, let it load. There we go. And for any specific questions, And this is going to be one of the resources, and you guys can always email me if you need anything, or Chris, and we can send this to you. But this is the city site for residential tax incentives, and this is what really will clarify and let you know what is available and what areas. So you'll see how they have it broken down. This is what you can go to for applications
Can't
to
see
get an idea
anything.
of what that looks like.
I can't see anything that you're doing. Can anybody else see? I just see the common pitfalls with tax abatement.
I'm gonna share my screen.
Are you guys gonna, we're gonna get access to these slides so we can grab these links, right?
Yeah, we can send you the resource slide. New share. I'm gonna share my screen. I think I was sharing everything.
No,
How about now?
there we go. Okay.
Okay, problem solved. Okay, so this, let me go back one since nobody got to see that. So this, like I said, is the city site for residential tax incentives, and it will break down kind of market ready areas, ready for revitalization areas, ready for opportunity areas. And in each one of these areas, this is where it will specify what the tax incentives are. So market ready, for example, it'll tell you here that really what they're looking at now are larger projects. So 100% tax abatement, 15-year tax abatements for 5 to 10 stories, high rises, like larger projects.
This is why in the short north, you've seen a lot of that going on.
Lots of high rises in
Yeah.
the short north.
There are a lot of incentives there for that.
Okay. And I'm just going to do a couple comparison points. So then when we look at the ready for revitalization area, for example, like Southern Orchards, just for a map pinpoint, the tax incentives here, if we do these projects, are 100% 15-year property tax abatements available for projects including single family, new construction, and rehabilitation. So they're really working on revitalizing the single family homes. There are incentives for multi-units and things like that as well, but you can see the difference between tax incentives in one area versus the other. And then when we look at the ready for opportunity areas, it'll very clearly state pretty much everything, everything is abatable. So 100% 15-year property tax abatements for all projects. They just want people in these areas helping bring them back up to speed. Yep. So this is a great resource to use, and I would encourage you guys to do some due diligence on that, and we can send you all of the information as well. Let me go back.
And, you know, one way I use it too is we all see when anybody's looking to invest around the country, and if you run any reports, Columbus is popping up in the top 10, pretty much in any report. So we get calls and, you know, from out of state, people from California, people from out west, they have money, they want to invest here. They don't know the areas. So anytime you can be experts on this and help them with these sorts of things, obviously it's a service we provide to them.
Well, and also thinking about how you can use this information as tools for your clients. So those first-time homebuyers that want to move into these areas, letting them know, like, here's what the city has planned. These are the incentives they have in place. This is why we're seeing a lot of these things go on. It kind of helps them understand what the longer term plan is for these areas, and then they get to determine whether or not that's something that they want to be a part of. And then what improvements qualify? This is a big one, a very, very big one. And we're going to talk about the pitfalls of this and kind of buying and selling on the listing representation and buying representation side. So improvements that qualify, improvements made under a city issued construction permit that affect the assessed value of a property. Not all improvements will change the value of a property as determined by the county evaluators. Only those applications that include building permits will be reviewed for eligibility. So what we have seen a lot of,
Highlight that.
yeah, highlight circle, all the stars, all the things go off here. What we have seen a lot of is investing's kind of cool. It's trendy. Everybody wants to be an investor in real estate, and they're down there and they're buying these properties and they're renovating these properties. And really an investor's main goal is to make as much money as quickly as possible. We have seen a lot of
Permits
good
not-
investors, not good investors, well done renovations, not well done renovations. And if they are not going through the process of getting their work permitted before they start their construction process, inspected during the construction or renovation process, and that's mechanicals inspected before the drywall goes up and then re-inspected by the city thereafter. And getting that certificate of occupancy, which is basically the city signing off saying, yes, they've done a good job. They've done all their permits. Everything's been inspected. If they do not go through all of that, none of these properties will be eligible for tax abatement.
Right, and the reason we're seeing a lot of it is a lot of times you'll see anybody doing a rehab, if it's inside the existing structure and they know they're not gonna get caught, I guess, they'll update a kitchen, they'll redo some wiring, to do all that. You still have to get the permits, because later, if they're gonna market that and say it's a tax abatement eligible, it's not true. If they don't have the permits and they
Well,
want.
and a lot of people aren't getting the permits. They don't want to pay for them. They
Right.
don't want to wait for them. They
Exactly.
don't want to be, their budget to be subject to doing it the right way.
Or if they're doing an addition, they go like, well, now I have to have a permit.
Yeah.
But if they're inside the structure, in their mindset, they're thinking, well, I don't have to pull a permit, I could save that money. But in the long run, it's hurting,
Right.
hurting it.
And so what we have seen, a lot of people have purchased, and I think it's just really agents not knowing or not being educated or not understanding what a lot of this means. So I just think it's lack of education in the marketplace so that agents are properly representing their buyers. And it's not to their own fault. I just think that they don't know, which is why it's so important for us to teach this class today.
Right,
Because I want my KWCP agents to like know what they're doing out there. So if you're not doing this, or you're helping a buyer and they're purchasing a home and they think that they're going to get tax abatement, that's not necessarily true based on how the project was done and if it's going to actually be able to pass the city requirements for phase 1 and phase 2 application.
right. So now they're, like Rachel touched on, there's so many levels we've seen down there. I've been down there so much over the last 2 years, and I've walked through beautiful places and I've walked through really not very good ones that have been updated supposedly. And we're seeing the whole gamut. Like, again, sometimes it's just not knowing. But if they haven't done that process, how many properties have we seen that now they're reselling it because the city shut them down just because they haven't been pulling permits? Now they're trying to sell it, and the next person's going to have to pull permits, redo work that's already been done. So you really want to be careful with, and even more so on the list side, you want to be listing it, oh, tax abatement eligible. You better make sure that's true.
Yeah. So we're going to give you some of the tools. We're going to dive into a little more specifics of buyer versus seller and what to really look at in those regards. But I wanted to let you know that just because it falls within these zones doesn't mean it's eligible. We've had clients call and say, well, I talked to the city. They said this house it is eligible for tax abatement. And I'm like, it sits within a CRA zone. It is not eligible for these reasons because that property owner, when they renovated this property, did not do this, or this. And I'll give you those tools to kind of verify and vet those things.
And my smell test walking in these, if it's a beautiful rehab and I'm walking through it, I'm probably pretty sure they pulled some permits. If I walk through it, it looks like lipstick on a pig and there's like paint slopped everywhere. I'm like, this was probably done quick churn and burn, we call it. And they're just trying to make a quick buck. And the buyer's not really going to have some incentives.
Well, what we don't want to do is we don't want to put our clients in a new home that they paid for, that they spent their money on, that they want to build a life around, and to have them walk in and not know what's behind the walls
Right.
because it looks pretty on the outside. Okay.
That's the lipstick on a pig.
So common pitfalls with tax abatement. So, like we talked about, the owners or the investors of the properties that are being renovated, and there's so much happening so quickly, the city cannot keep up. Like, they're doing the best that they can. They're not going through that formal city permit and approval process. And then the application. So it's not just about the permits, it's also about the application. And a lot of times the applications are not being submitted or fully completed with all the required documentation for phase 1 and phase 2 that is needed for these to even be approved. So Now the city, they've changed because of COVID and their backlog of these
Yeah.
things. They used to take phase one, which was pre-construction, and you'd submit that. And then you'd submit phase two, which is kind of your post-construction, wrapping up that project. And the city would look at phase one, approve it, look at phase two, approve it. Now the city, because they were getting so many phase one applications, but not getting phase two, they just decided they're gonna look at everything at once. So they want phase one and phase two applications together, submitted, and this is taking 9 to 12 months at least for approval. And we know that when a property is fully renovated, that investor or that seller is going to want to get that house on the market. They're not going to wait a year to list the house and sell it once tax abatement's approved. So we're going to talk about some things that we can do to kind of do our due diligence and protect our clients through that contract phase. Make sure that we have copies of phase one and phase two applications for everybody's review and file.
Are you gonna touch on that later here instead of, okay?
Yeah.
Because I was gonna bring that up.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the listing side, what to know when listing in these areas. So accurate marketing. I think we've all seen at some point somewhere some marketing that talks about it's tax abatement eligible, or application was submitted,
Yeah, or
now more affordable to own this home.
in a tax abatement area, just stating
Yep.
that doesn't necessarily make
Right.
that it's gonna happen.
So accurate marketing. So the first thing is it in a CRA? So the city has maps. It has a tool, which is also in my resources, where you can put in an address and it'll tell you if it falls within that zone. So is it within one of those zones? You as the listing agent should know that. You should be able to identify if it falls within those areas. Now, is it tax abatement eligible, and what makes it eligible? Let's see. So when we go back to,
I think
Our
it's that
site.
site we've shown, right?
this is my favorite site. It has all the things you need. Let's see. I go to this one because this is the one that I do all the time. Okay, so is it eligible? Let's see here. What makes it eligible for tax abatement? So yes, it has to fall with us in this zone. We go down and we go to our, we'll just look at single family. I'll pull up the application. This is what the application looks like. And so to me, this is what makes something eligible or not. So pre-construction is pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot going on. It's kind of basically what your plan is for that property. So when you're representing your sellers and they're like, oh yeah, it's tax abatement eligible, I applied for phase one or phase two, I would really challenge you guys to do a good job in collecting that information and collecting evidence, because at the end of the day, if you misrepresent a property and say that it's tax abatement eligible, but it's truly not, and a lot of these criteria are not met, is it really eligible? Just because it sits within that area does not make it eligible for tax abatement. Does that make sense? Okay.
And sometimes it could be that seller, like you mentioned, they know they're in that area, they've been told that it is, so they just tell you that. So making sure that they didn't even know that they had to fill out an application or do this paperwork. So you want to make sure that they're aware of all that.
Right. And I have helped my seller clients with this documentation. I think I've done probably about 20, 25 of these where, we collect all the information, we get everything signed off on. I have copies of all of phase one and phase two applications with all the required documents. So that I can, when I go to market a property, if I'm putting on there that it's tax abatement eligible or we submitted for
Right.
tax abatement, phase one and phase two, I have evidence of that and all the required documentation to support that.
But we're still not stating, if it hasn't been approved
Right.
yet, that it is tax abated, because like you said, that can take 12 months.
Right.
We
Most of
can't
these
wait 12
properties-
months to list it.
Yeah, no, most of these properties are not tax abated when we put them on the market. They are
In
usually
process.
in process for approval, which is what these applications are. So the pre-construction is pretty straightforward.
Now, I will say on that though, because Rachel's real thorough with this app process, the city's not in the business of turning these down. If you've got all your documentation, you meet the criteria, you've provided all this, they want to do it. So it's not like they're rolling the dice. They're actually going to have a higher percentage chance that it gets approved.
Right.
yes, they're taking a risk buying it, but seeing all this in place should give them a little more peace of mind.
Right. So yeah, pre-construction, it's really simple. So the biggest things are we taking photos before and after? They want to see, the city wants to see what the house looked like before it was pretty and what it looks like after we made it pretty. So getting all of our photos taken, what we think our estimated renovation budget would be, who actually owns the property. So for you guys, your buyers cannot submit for tax abatement when they purchase a property. The only person that can submit for tax abatement is the owner of the property who did the renovation or built the property. So it is not an option for the next owner.
Very key if you've got buyers going in there, because we've done that, where we've had buyers, where we've directed them to pull away because it's been told it's tax abatement, and they're counting on it in their payments, they're counting on that. And then we find out it's not going to qualify, you're not going to be able to do it. And they're being told, you know, the seller's saying, well, no, you can apply. No, you can't.
Yeah. So very clearly, the
Yeah.
only person that can apply for tax abatement is the property owner who did the work. Yes.
I have a question. So if you're asking, so if you're representing your buyer, then are you adding to your contract a clause saying it's contingent upon the property being sold with the tax abatement or something in that kind of language? Are you adding that?
Yeah, we have some language for that, not on the approval, but I'll share kind of the buy side or the seller side, some of the clauses that we've used or seen on contracts in these areas to kind of put that extra layer of protection into our agreement.
And unfortunately, if it's been flipped and there's that 12-month waiting period to know if it's tax abatement, it's probably going to be verbiage that just said the process, it's in process. You know, the paperwork's complete and it's been done, but we don't make it contingent on it being tax abated because our buyer's going to be waiting maybe as long as 12 months.
Yep.
So,
And
yeah,
that's
we
been
can
about
share
the
that.
timeline. So when I've submitted for tax abatement for some of these properties, I usually put my contact information as well as my sellers on here, depending on how much I'm involved in this process, just so that I can get the notification for when it's approved or if they need any additional documentation. A lot of times the city will come back and say, we didn't get your $100 application fee. And I'm like, well, here's a copy of the check that says you cashed it. Here's the $100 application fee.
We do have to
So-
keep in mind it is government entity, so there is going to be some of that.
So keeping good records and documentation along the way is really going to be key. So pre-construction is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. Really, the biggest thing that you want to pay attention to is that post-construction piece on the listing side. So challenging your sellers to make sure that they have all of this information and it can be provided. So first off, is it in an area? You can go to this link, it'll tell you, it'll give you a map. You can verify it falls within one of those areas. Construction and occupancy type. So what type of incentive or what type of renovation, new construction, conversion, garage, whatever it is that you're improving on the property. Are you an owner occupant or is this a rental? Or a lot of people, you know, if they own the property, usually it falls under owner occupant rather than rental. Construction information. So is this new construction or is it being renovated? Let me see down here. Okay. So if it's new construction, what's the estimated new construction? So I think we've seen like Rockford started to build some new homes in some of these areas. I think primarily that's, I don't know if Miranda's down there. I think I've seen primarily Rockford or investors building new construction through private builders. So new construction, that would be that piece. Renovation wise, they want to know what the total cost of renovation is going to look like. Total cost of construction, things like that. When we get into phase two, let's see. This is really where they say, okay, prove it. So it's like, okay, great. We have a concept in phase one. We have an idea of what we're going to do. This is kind of our plan. Phase two with the city is like, okay, prove that you did that. And I want to see evidence of that before we're going to go ahead and grant tax abatement. So this is really where they're going to ask for new construction versus renovation. I don't do a lot in new construction, so I'm just going to jump to renovation as far as down in these areas. So renovation, like what is the total actual cost of the renovation? So they say, okay, we estimated we're going to spend $120,000 on this renovation. What did you actually spend? They're looking for a certain margin, the city is, for approval. And when they said substantial improvements to the property, proving that cost of renovation is what helps them determine whether or not it was substantial.
Have we determined, because I haven't seen where we know if it's a percentage, have we seen?
I know if you
some-
usually invest, like if you buy it for 80 and you at least put 80 into it,
Yeah.
they're usually, that's what they're looking for.
If
They're
you're
looking
doubling
for
the value.
a double value. Now that is not rocket science. That's not a true formula. That's not anything like formal. That's just what I generally see.
But I think if you buy, like you talk about, you buy it for 80 and you do a $10,000 kitchen remodel, that is not gonna get,
It's not gonna hit the
it's not gonna
mark.
help you that much anyway, because now your value's 100, 90, 100 versus 80.
So permits. So they're gonna wanna see all your building permits and your permit numbers. And they're gonna want that document attached. So when you go and you get a property permitted, you hang that little thing in the window while you're in construction mode and all the inspectors come through and sign off on things. That's what they're looking for. And they're also looking for that certificate of final occupancy. So that's where the city has come in and said, yep, you did all the work. All the permits have been closed. I can now give you final occupancy and sign off on this renovation project for the city.
Can you show them how to look one up on a property?
Yeah, I have that later.
Okay.
And then ownership, so making sure like you actually own the property. So this is what I was telling you. The buyer of that property cannot do it for the owner. The owner has to be the one who does the tax abatement submission. And then photos. So they want to see the before photos and they want to see the after photos. They want to see the outside of the house. They want to see the rooms on the inside. They want to visually see that you have substantially improved the condition of that property. If you do not have any of these things, you will not get approved for tax abatement. And when they say cost, they're looking for a notarized list of all the work completed. They're looking for invoices. They're looking for proof of you spending money as that entity or that person that owns that property on that house.
So just by saying this, it's many, in some areas, we're seeing so many kind of, again, I call them the churn and burn, where somebody's just going in to make a quick profit, that they're not doing this.
Right.
So if you can work with investors that do this, now your listing is going to stand out over the ones in that area that don't do this. Because you do have an incentive to give to somebody. All things being equal, if I'm paying $250 for this, and I'm getting a 15-year tax abatement, which one am I going to buy? So, very key to make sure your investors realize the importance of, even though it's a headache, in the long run, it's going to make their asset more.
Does
viable.
anybody work with investors in these areas? Okay.
I do.
Well, yeah, so does. These are really good conversations to have with them, and I would challenge you as agents to decide who you want to work with in the marketplace, because their reputation will rub off on your reputation. Our standard has been that all the investors that we work with, they go through the right process. They do the tax abatement. They get the permits pulled. If for some reason they're not doing that, we have to question our relationship with them, because at the end of the day, it could be a potential liability for you and how you're marketing and representing these properties, what you know about the properties, what you know about the conditions of the properties. You saw it before it was renovated.
Right.
You saw it after it was renovated. You
And
worked through the inspection.
At a minimum, when we've had clients that, hey, we need to list this as tax abatement so we can get it sold, you got to draw that line in the sand and say, we can't, and here's why. And know, we're educated enough on it that we know that, so we can put a firm hold there.
As listing agents, don't allow your marketing to be a bait and switch. There's an agent that is in the marketplace that does a lot with investors in these areas.
Not in our
Not brokerage.
Not KW.
Not to name names.
But not
And I
KW.
have noticed a lot of their properties are misrepresented with whether or not they're tax abatement eligible or what has been submitted for approval. And just recently I noticed all of that language has been removed from their listing. So I'm not sure if they were reported for misrepresentation or what that looked like. But it was misrepresentation, because just because it sits in these areas does not mean it's eligible. And I think agents that are now that we've been working in these areas and we've been helping our buyers purchase in these areas, a little bit more aware of what to look at and look for.
I think something bit them.
Okay, so any questions on that part of it? Okay. So we talked about has the work been permitted, approved, or permits closed? So there is this fun tool within Franklin County. Let me find it. Oh, I keep clicking my laptop thinking it's this. Let's see.
You put a lot of work into this. Thank you.
I have so much in my brain that I really like. We've learned so much that we just wanted to share.
Yeah.
Because I think it's so important and nobody is talking about it. And we haven't seen the other side of how these homeowners are going to feel a year and a half, 2 years into the home that they bought. And I can guarantee you there's going to be a lot of conversations or lawsuits that have yet to come to play. So,
and we, while you're looking this up, we've kind of run through it with the whole gamut, because some of our investors, if I'm running around with them buying the properties at the beginning of the process, Rachel's listing them once they're flipped and redone, so she's learned a lot about this part of it. I'm seeing the work that's being done, so and are they pulling permits? So yeah, we've seen it all the way through, and I think that's what's been helpful, because if you're just coming in and seeing one at the end, you may not be digging into all this, and it's good to know what we have kind of found out over the last 2 years. But
I had some investors that I fired because they would go out and like buy a property without me and I wouldn't see it. And then they would put the lipstick on the pig. And I ended up saying, I can't even be part of this anymore. So I know what you're saying. Yeah, that's good.
yeah, so Franklin County has this fun tool. It's a citizen access portal. If you just Google like Franklin County permit lookup, you can go here, you can go to permit tracking. You can enter the citizen access portal. Bear with me, I'm gonna try to remember my password.
and this is what I was referring to, right? You're going to show them how you can look up a property's permits.
Well, it would help if I spell my last name right. Let's see.
It's not typing it in.
Is that what's happening? Oh, there it goes. Okay. All right. So when we talk about resources and what's available, all of these things are here for you guys. Let's see. Let me do it on my computer and see if I can figure out the password.
Maybe it's password.
If you want to take over some conversation.
The password is password. Yeah. So yeah, what she's looking up is basically how you can, if somebody says, yeah, this is tax abatement eligible, this is one way you can kind of find out if that's true. Like go into that address, look up, see if they have a permit that's been closed out, right? That's what you're going to show them. Is it open still? Like I said, we've gone over there. My investor will buy properties from other investors that have now since decided just to cut bait and get out of there because it's half done. And again, we'll walk through, and if the city's got no permitting and it's just been partially done, sometimes we'll call them on it. We'll say, oh yeah, the city shut us down. You're right. I mean, they don't even like to let you know that. So you want to be really careful that you do your own due diligence to dig into that if you're trying to buy something, because you don't want to buy it for your client, then find out that there's these fines at the city because of these permits that haven't been filed, and now you're backtracking. I mean, you're going to make a client for life if you're helping them learn. You save them from getting burned.
Right. Okay, so here's one where so you log in, you can set up a citizen access portal. Down here, search applications and permits. This is like the best tool to know whether or not something's on track or if it smells funny.
I don't know that I answered your question. Did you ask something?
So you can search an address. So here's one that we did. I don't know why the keyboard is not doing
830 South High.
I think it's reading it. There we go.
Are you doing South Ohio?
Yeah. Okay. So this is what it looks like when we know permits have been pulled. Permits have been closed. You can see the city's done their inspections. There's a series of inspection trips. It'll tell you they did a building permit for, well, this is a compliance notice, let me go to page 2 because those would have been the original ones. So these are all the main permits that have been pulled. So they did a plumbing permit, an electrical permit, a mechanical permit. They ended up transferring a permit, which was the major renovation. There's some description here. Roof, window, siding. So this to me says, okay, this investor went through the whole permit process. They have all the mechanical permits, they have the major renovation permits. And when I see status of closed on everything, that means it's been re-inspected, and the city is satisfied. So that to me is a good one. Hate to do this to it. There's a lot of folks.
Yeah, 43.
Okay, so here, for reference, is one. So we have permits that are issued, but we have nothing that's been closed. And this house, for example, is currently, well, basically they've been issued, but there's been no follow through. So I'm not seeing any inspections. I'm not seeing any closed permits.
Any city sign off.
Any city sign off, any of those things. So to me, if we have a property relisted and the scope of work isn't closed, there's no inspections, nothing, then they're not going to be eligible for tax abatement.
And it's not, that verbiage is not going in the listing.
Right. Yeah, we're not putting that in our listing to say, you know, this is eligible or it's not eligible.
This is a case where if the seller insists that it be in there, then they need to find a different agent because.
That would be my recommendation.
Right.
Okay, so questions on that. This tool is a tool that nobody uses and it's easily available and accessible. So I would encourage you guys to set up a login and get in there and start poking around.
I think part of our intent of this is to protect agents because, I mean, these could, like you said, on the flip side of this, when we see the far end of this and people not getting their abatements that they thought they had, it could be pretty significant as far as a lawsuit, I think. You know, if you're all of a sudden now not saving thousands of dollars and hey, my realtor told me this, we just want to protect that from happening to agents in our brokerage here.
Well, and you know, we have some sort of professional responsibility. These are all tools that are real estate related that we have access to. And from a due diligence standpoint, are you really doing your due diligence for your client? And are you helping them understand what the story of this house is and what's available if you're not utilizing these tools to do your research? And I don't know is not all, you know, that's not usually an acceptable answer in the court of law. So I think you guys have the responsibility, or good agents have the responsibility. And to be honest with you, when you're having conversations with your seller clients or your buyer clients, to me, this is a value proposition.
Yeah.
This is a huge value proposition. Why should one investor work with you versus another to resell all of these properties? Well, here's what I know and why. That's how I, you know, yes, there's agents that'll take a 4% listing and do all of these things, but that's not us. And also, this is my value. This is what I know. This is what I do. This is how I help support my clients. This is how I help get tax abatement submitted and approved. These are the tools. And that alone has allowed us to sell more of these properties at a higher value than some of these other ones that tend to sit on the market just because the things weren't done right.
And I think it even applies for, you know, you could think of investors that aren't even just the ones doing the flipping, but what if they're wanting to buy it and rent it out? Because you can get this and rent it too. I mean, it can get approved as a rental. So now if they're thinking they're going to get this tax incentive, that can be the difference of them having cash flow or not on a rental property.
Or owner occupants. What a great opportunity
Yeah.
to buy a property and do a renovation loan and get your 15-year
Exactly.
or whatever the difference tax abatement, you know, save yourself $120,000 of property value taxes.
Throwing the lender credit.
Maybe do an owner occupant, live in that property, rent it out, let it become a wealth building tool for you in the future. So those are some really great conversations and value adds that you can have with your people. We have a lot of first-time home buyers that really want to like be in these areas and for the opportunity to build wealth in a shorter amount of time.
House hacks, but that's a whole other topic.
Rach, when you list these, I know that this may be in here, but there's they bring a lot of attention in some of these areas, right? Some of the rental scams, some of the things that happen. So if you do have listings, or if you're getting into this market, like what are some of the things that you would caution from your experience, maybe?
All right. I will tell you, air conditioners and appliances wander off about every other day,
Even front doors.
and front doors.
We just had a front door stolen.
So, yeah, I don't know why. It was a nice front door. I would
Be
tell
aware
you,
of your
secure the property,
surroundings.
making sure that you're securing property, and
Yeah.
and I put in writing my recommendation to my sellers to secure the property.
If it's vacant, use Simply Safe, use Tattletale. There's all these wireless securities. You can move it from one to the next when it becomes occupied. It's not a high expense, and it's cheaper than a front door. And you know, that's what we're dealing with now in 0-degree weather. So
Well,
Yeah.
to be honest, people aren't paying a whole lot of attention because so many of these houses are being worked on and there's so many construction crews in these areas. When things are being hauled in and out of a house, well, we had carpet stolen out of a house not too long ago. I don't know why, it's carpet. I'm assuming they're gonna go put it on a different
yeah,
job.
they're gonna go 2 blocks over and put it in their house.
But, you know, stressing the importance of properly securing the property is huge. The investors, they put $120,000 into a property and then they don't want to spend the money to get a security system. It makes no sense to me.
Mhm.
I would encourage,
Right.
yeah, and put it in writing. My recommendation is that you put security on the property, and then that way it's not a responsibility of you, because we are responsible for who comes in and out of the home through the MLS and our lock boxes. And if there's an incident, you know, we have to protect ourselves as well. So.
What system or couple of systems, what system have you found the best luck with?
I think most of our investors use Simply Safe.
I like Simply Safe,
It's
yeah.
loud.
Yeah, I mean, because you can buy Simply Safe, a lot of times not even $100 for a unit, and then you just go around in 10 minutes and hook up all your little things. And if you don't pay for the $15 a month monitoring, which I do when they're vacant, but you don't have to, you can start that, stop at any time. If you don't pay for that, it still makes a wicked loud noise and scares them off. And then, you know, someone's gonna call you and complain, and then it eventually shuts off. But if you do have it monitored, the police will show up. So it's super cheap. I move it from empty ones, you know, they're empty, I have it in there, and then when it gets rented, I move it to another empty one, so.
Yep, and then, like Jonathan mentioned, rental scams. So I don't know if
Yeah.
anybody has had some experience with that, but there are a lot of rental scams, especially in these areas where new listings will go up and now they're posted on Craigslist or Facebook or somewhere for rent. They're just looking to collect deposits from people. We always get the call of, you know, is this house for rent? Yada, 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 because our sign's usually in the yard. And they're telling people just to go look at the house or try to get in the window or peek around. So just being aware when those things happen, based on Lori and our conversations, best thing to do is just file a police report. And file a police report if there's any incidents at the home. Just having everything on record, I think, is an extra layer of protection for you as agents, but also is what's responsible for the seller to make sure that maybe we can get some extra patrolling or whatever that looks like. But yeah, anytime you put a for sale sign in the front yard of a vacant house, it's kind of like a come check me out, see what I'm working with type alert. So protect the house, encourage your people to protect the house. Okay, so we talked about the approval process, who can apply, all of those good things. What we need to apply, we kind of ran through, referring to the City of Columbus website. Now, these things are always changing, or they might update their application process, or they might update their requirements. So I would say check it on a case-by-case basis. If you're working in that area, make sure nothing's changed. How to apply. So again, the biggest thing, I used to actually physically take them down to the city and drop them off and get my little receipt that said it was submitted on this date. Doesn't quite work that way anymore with COVID. So you can either mail them in, or I will send a copy to Michelle. She's a resource at the end of this slideshow as well. And just ask for confirmation that she received the tax abatement package, so that I have something in writing to provide to a potential buyer or buyer's agent when I'm listing in these areas that shows, okay, here's the whole packet, here's proof that it was submitted. To me, I want to be able to provide that evidence to make sure that I'm fulfilling my obligation or my seller's obligation for the contract, if it's stated in the contract. We talked about timeline for application. Oop, how do I go back? So, like I said, it can take 9 to 12 months. The buyers get a little anxious when they buy properties. So if you sold a buyer a house, they might ask you every couple months if you've heard anything. I will tell you, they do not provide, the city will not provide courtesy updates of, hey, we're in process every couple months, like just to give you feel goods about it. They will let you know if they need anything from you still, or if you're approved or not. So, and it'll take a long time. You can always inquire. I usually will provide Michelle's information or her assistant's information to inquire about the status of it, if that makes the buyer feel a little bit better, the new homeowner feel a little bit better. But it's going to take a while. So setting realistic expectations with the buyer's agent about how long this takes, not promising that it'll be approved when you're listing, knowing that it is a process to get these things approved by the city. Okay. Questions?
Then the 15-year tax abatement starts at the approval. Or
No, the
it's-
submission.
It starts at the submission. So if they're waiting a year, they may end up then just with 14 years left.
Right. Yep. So, okay. And we talk about I just want to touch on misrepresentation. I cannot stress it enough. I think it's because it's my pet peeve. When I know people are lying and it's like literally clear in your face. So these are a couple taglines that I've seen on listings. 15-year tax abatement available, making this home even more affordable. And then I go to look up that listing and I have an expired permit. So is it really available or is it not? How is that being interpreted when you're marketing that to the public? 15-year tax abatement has been submitted, making this even more affordable. Has all the documentation truly been submitted? Can they prove that? So I think if you guys put anything in your marketing about whether or not this property is eligible or tax abatement has been submitted, you better have evidence that shows that application has been fully completed and you have all the documentation that's required for approval, or that it's actually truly available or eligible based on where you're at with the status. There have been times where I've listed properties that are eligible and we are working on submission for that tax abatement, so it's not quite there. So I never say that it's been submitted until it's been submitted. If I say it's eligible, it's truly eligible. I know all the permits have been pulled. We're waiting on maybe 1 or 2 things, but it is eligible. So maybe we're waiting on the city to come back out and just do their final sign off of certificate of occupancy. Sometimes those can be delayed. So we'll get it on the market, we'll list it. I know the city is scheduled to come in a week or so to do that final occupancy, and then I have everything that I need. So it is eligible based on how we've followed the permit process through. Does that
Right.
make sense?
And to reiterate on the buy side, if you've got buyers looking in there, then you can look this up on anything that is stated that
Right.
way and look up the permits and make sure it is the case.
Yep. Okay. And then a couple things to note. There are so many lender programs right now that are really focused on providing incentives to buyers in these areas that are investing in these areas. It's an effort to kind of balance some of the lender portfolios in these opportunity zones or revitalization areas. So I use a lender, Aaron Petrie with Union Savings Bank. He does a great job. They have a community outreach lending program. I will say, check with your lenders, see if they offer anything, see if any of their programs are currently active or on hold because of COVID. There have been so many financial changes as to what different lenders are offering. So just know that. To me, I think this is a great tool when listing a property. There have been a lot of times where I have known about this program and representing the listing, because these are first-time home buyers. A lot of them are first-time home buyers moving into these areas. And so they need closing costs, or they might need something like that. So if I can utilize a program like this and educate the buyer's agent on what's available to their buyer in this area, that $3,500 or $5,000 or whatever that looks like for closing cost credit could be provided by a lender, which allows me to negotiate a higher net number for my seller client while the buyer gets what they need from a financial standpoint.
And these are true like grants. These are not paid back. So it's not like a lender down payment assistance that's getting paid back. It's just free money basically in these areas.
And this program, community outreach lending program, I mean, it has nothing to do with your credit, your income, your financial status, anything. It literally has to do with where the house sits.
Right.
Period.
Yeah. And I will say with what you just touched on, because I use Aaron Petrie as well, and talking to him recently, theirs is currently on hold during COVID. So that is a key thing. Check with them. Your lenders, some of them have it reactivated. He said theirs will be soon, but just not yet.
Yeah.
So
and I think like Fifth Third has a program. I mean, there's tons of places that
Huntington
have
has it.
programs.
Bank of America has one as well.
Oh, go ahead. What? Bank
Bank of America has one as well, but it's only on the property. So it doesn't matter what the person makes.
Right.
It has to do with the census tract and where, if it's like in the low income census tract.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's what this is. So you could be a $200,000 a year income earner and it still applies.
Yep.
If you're buying in that area.
Yeah. It's
Now it is owner occupant.
Correct.
It's not for investors. There are other incentives sometimes for investors, but this one is not. You have to be an owner.
correct. So knowing what is available, and to me, that's an opportunity to also market these properties. So tax abatement eligibility being a huge opportunity for a buyer. To me, that's a differentiator in a listing of whether they should choose mine or choose a different house. Whether, knowing these programs and what's available to buyers and putting something in there. So running this by Lori, I can put in my property description, this home qualifies for up to $3,000 closing cost assistance, community outreach lending program with Union Savings Bank. So we're telling the buyers that we may be able to get tax abatement and we may be able to get closing costs. To me, that is a great opportunity for a buyer to own a home in these areas where other agents might not have that opportunity if they're not going through this process with their clients. So, questions? Okay, let's talk about buyers. This is actually where I think this is the hardest part of this area is when you're representing buyers, because I feel like a lot of that liability falls on you and knowing what you're doing and how you're representing them and providing them the right tools and access to information to make a good decision. And we've sold so many homes down there where buyer's agents don't even know what to ask. And to be honest with you, if they don't know what to ask, sometimes it's not my job to tell them, depending on what side I'm representing. So really educating yourselves on how you're going to represent your buyers down here, because there's a lot to know and there's a lot to be aware of.
And where Rachel even pointed out, where we'll help that buyer agent on our side, not every agent's going to do that. So if they're representing something, whether they know or not, but improperly, it's going to be up to you on the buy side to make sure that it's accurate.
Right. Okay, so benefits of purchasing in some of these areas. This is kind of what I talk to our buyer clients about. So appreciating markets. If you look at trend graphics, great tool. Take it back 2-3 years. It'll show you exactly how these areas are appreciating. You can pocket certain neighborhoods, you can pocket certain zip codes. To me, I think that's a good share of how much equity has been earned in these areas over the last 5-10 years.
Yeah.
I had a client buy a nationwide healthy home, I think I don't know what year that was, 2012, 2011, something like that, before a lot of this revitalization was happening. And we cashed her out last year and she spent a year driving in an RV around the United States, living her best life. So there is a lot of appreciation or equity opportunity in these areas for you guys to share with your clients. And I think that trend graphics or knowing your market trends is really a great tool. Potential for tax incentive or tax abatement. So that is a huge opportunity for lower property taxes for a long amount of time. A lot of these properties are renovated, so they're getting an updated home at a first-time home buyer price point in an appreciating area. Kind of nice when they can walk into something a little bit new and more turnkey. This is a heavy first-time home buyer market and therefore first-time home buyer prices. So our buyers that are in the suburbs that might not need a suburb lifestyle or something, this might be an area to share with them as far as prices go and what they can get for their dollar.
Well, and when you talk about this tax incentive, I mean, we've sold homes down there, so if it's got the tax abatement, it could be 1,600 a year. So they're paying $100 a month on their taxes. They buy that same $250 to plus $300,000 home somewhere else. What's that tax?
Right.
3 times that?
At
And that's
least.
on their house payment. So, you know, it may be the difference between them qualifying on that home in that area versus not qualifying in another area.
And knowing, you know, this market's really tough for home buyers right now. And if there's an opportunity for them to get some sort of lender program or incentive, I think that's your responsibility to provide them that option. So being aware of what lender programs are available in these areas for these buyers. Nobody wants to leave $5,000 on the table in closing costs. And so I know everybody has their preferred lenders that they work with, but we also have to think about what's best for our buyer clients. And if we're focused on, or they want to move or live in these areas, being aware of what lender programs and incentives are available to them, I think it's huge. So pitfalls and hurdles. We talked a lot about this, a lot about tax abatement, not taking the listing agent or seller's word for it, asking for proof and collecting documentation, what the actual word eligible means. We talked about non-permitted and inspected work. Again, non-permanent inspected work. I will tell you, this is going to mean costly repairs for your buyers, hidden defects. We haven't gotten to the other side of what it's like to live in these homes after renovation, but I feel like a lot of those conversations are going to come up in the next year or so.
Here's an example. I walked through one that was flipped and being sold in the mid 200s, and cosmetically it looked beautiful when you walked through it. When we went upstairs, we noticed there were no vents put in anywhere upstairs. There was no way to get any heat or cooling to the upstairs. This being May or June, you wouldn't have noticed that if you don't know to look for those things. How does someone renovate an entire house and not add any HVAC vents into the upstairs? Now, someone going to come in and buy it not knowing that? You know, these are the things as agents we want to make sure we're looking for. I mean, that kind of stands out, but there's a lot of little things like that that sometimes may not. So look through these closely.
Inspections are really, really huge. I know sometimes it's, you know, if you're in a competitive situation, you're waiving your inspection, you're waiving your remedy. In these areas with a fully renovated property, I would 100% encourage you and your clients, you to coach your clients on getting their inspections done.
Yeah, call it as is. You don't have to do an RTR, but you want that ability to walk away when you find out there's no vents upstairs, or the basement walls haven't been done properly, or permits haven't been pulled, or the roof's bad. So
or in the summertime, you don't realize when it's August and it hasn't rained for 3 weeks that the basement floods.
I mean, we all walk in these, and cosmetically, you know, down there, it's like you walk in one, it might look like the next one with the gray tones and the white walls, and everything looks clean and shiny, but behind the walls is key. So yeah, definitely don't encourage them to just buy as is since it's all new, because there's just too much. I don't want to say shoddy, but
well, when you're an investor and you're hiring contractors to do work for you, and you're looking at your profit margins, and that's one of the most important things to you, what we find a lot is they compromise on the quality of work based on the budget, and that quality of work is challenging to overcome because you get what you pay for. So they're not running the electrical right, they're not running the HVAC right, nobody's checking or validating their work, the city's not coming in and inspecting things. A lot of times these houses are 100 years old.
I mean, we had one that wasn't inspected and then later found out that the gas stove didn't even have a gas line run to it.
Right.
So again, now, did the investor know that? Probably not, but the contractor that he hired knew he didn't put it in. So
or they just have crews coming in and out and doing different parts of the job, and everything's subcontracted out. So there's really no cohesiveness or accountability around it. And a lot of times when these investors are out of state or out of area, who's managing the project and who's managing the work and who's accountable to that? The guy out in California just sending checks over to their contracting crew here He has no idea what's going on.
And we all know, you know, because we are popping up as a city on those top 10 places to invest, just like when we have a hailstorm, we get all the roofing companies coming in. Well, we're getting all the contractors coming in that are taking work and they're all busy. Some are good and some aren't. So if it's an out-of-state investor, I'm not saying you need to vet their contractors, but you don't necessarily have to think that every one of their contractors is top notch. Some of them are coming in to make a good buck.
Yep, they're following the money. And then I always challenge this about the residential property disclosure. So all the residential property disclosures I see on renovated homes down here have no issues noted anywhere. And I have clients that are guilty of that too. And, you know, I disclose everything. If I have an inspection report from a previous buyer, I know it's my responsibility to disclose those issues. It's, you know, my job's not to buffer any of that. My license and my reputation is more important than the sale of one house. But I always question if something has been on the market and off the market and the residential property disclosure says everything is kosher. I really challenge that. So I challenge you guys to ask for any inspection reports. How can you have a house that was taken all the way down to the studs and it have no issues? And be
Right, and the
fully
way they
renovated
get
with no issues.
And they try to get around it by saying, well, they're an investor, they never lived in a home, so they
Right.
don't know.
Well, that doesn't excuse you from any liability towards the condition of the property, especially when you know what the scope of work is and you know what you've had conversations around and what you've hired to be repaired.
Right.
So I always chuckle a little bit because all the residential property disclosures are like, oh, no, nothing wrong with the house. And I'm like, well, you took it down to the studs, you
Yeah.
fixed a broken house, you renovated it.
I mean, we had one that you know, didn't have a roof for 3 years, it's just been getting it rained in. So maybe you should disclose that there was no roof and now it's all new. I mean, at least then that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Don't say nothing.
So as agents, you know, I think a red flag representing buyers is we're going to see the RPD that has nothing noted on any issues or things like that, but challenging them, especially if it's come off the market in contract and come back on the market. They really have evidence now as to what the conditions are, and it probably was due to inspection, and they should be, the listing agent should be sharing those things with you and your buyer. Okay. And then here's one other little nugget that I learned about more recently, I guess within the last 6 to 12 months. Let me go back. So Board of Revision complaints. Has anybody heard of the Board of Revision? Yeah, no, yes, no. Okay. So the Board of Revision is actually something within the city of Columbus where someone can file a complaint against a property that says basically taxes are due on it and it can be reviewed. And when it's in that pending or there's an active case on it, what happens is there's a look back from when that was filed. And if the ruling states that, okay, yes, the value did change, then whoever owns the property at that time that is stated or that judgment is made is responsible for any back taxes to prorate the offset. So I'm going to give you an example. I've seen it all. Let me see. Let me go to the auditor site and pull up a property of ours. And really, a lot of what I've seen in these areas is the school board is going in and they're flagging, they've hired an attorney to flag these properties. And we've seen properties that have been sold like to investors 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times within the last year, right? And so it might have started at a $70,000 transfer price, and now the last investor bought it for $130,000, and they're going to do the project and renovate it. And so the school board, a lot of times in Franklin County in these areas, have hired an attorney to look at these transfers, and they say, okay, investor, I see a $70,000 value. I see you just purchased it for $130,000. Now I want you to pay $130,000 worth of taxes for this property. But what's happening is because everything is delayed or lagged with city and process and everything else and the review of these things, when that case gets filed, it gets tagged to that property. And if someone buys that property, they can look back and be responsible for that difference in taxes through that amount of time.
So when are they doing this? When does that happen? I mean, what's the flag that pulls that up for them to,
Transfer, they're looking at the transfers. The attorneys are looking at the transfers.
like, a short period of time, or are they looking at all the transfers throughout all of Franklin County, or?
They're
What-
probably looking at the transfers within these CRA areas to
Okay,
make sure that the school or whatever it is getting the proper funding based on things moving so quickly and values appreciating so rapidly.
gotcha. Okay.
I think it's all areas. This is Karen. I had it was it last year, clients that purchased in Upper Arlington, and they, and that had, they bought it, it was a divorce situation, so it was purchased and then sold, I think within, if I remember correctly, like a year and a half when my buyers bought it, and then the taxes went up significantly when they got, and it was the school board, same thing, they're wanting to collect their money, so.
And I know the attorney in the areas for these investment zones is what I know, so I'm sure I'm happening elsewhere. So on the auditor's site, there's this little tab that nobody probably ever goes to, BOR status. And that's the board of revision status. So whether or not there's a case. So you can see right now there's one that was pending. Actually, it was mailed out in 2020. So the owner of the property was notified in 2020 as far as a case being filed or a complaint being filed against the property. They just mailed their decision in 2021. This property transferred last summer. So what that means is if they deemed that, yes, these additional taxes are due, when you go to closing, everybody signs off that to the title company's best knowledge, all the taxes are where they need to be and there's no future action for the seller, right? They are not responsible for any taxes moving forward. If you're not checking this, there could be that board of revision review in place or that complaint filed against the property. And if this buyer bought the property in 2020, if that complaint was deemed appropriate and they went ahead and adjusted those taxes, that buyer would be responsible for the offset for 2020, even though they didn't technically own the property probably that whole year. So another little nugget to look at. It's something to kind of be addressed. I've seen a couple different things happen where in negotiations, we talk about it, or maybe we provide a credit today for that potential increase in the future. And we agree, okay, we're gonna give $1,000 credit if that were to happen or not. So usually it's worked out in the conversation when negotiating, but that's a little nugget to kind of be aware of as well as you're thinking about how you're representing buyers. Okay. Let's see from current slide. So yeah, we had the situation where school board was challenging the valuation on the property. It was the auditor valuation was currently about 79,000. With the auditor, there was a transfer price. I think the transfer price was actually 150, but the complaint asked for the taxes to be raised up to a value of 139. And then they said taxes will be likely adjusted down the road, but there's nothing for you guys to do right now unless they want to fight the valuation. So my question, and this came from one of the attorneys that we work with in title, because I said, okay, what's the seller's responsibility? What do I need to do as the listing agent? What does this potentially mean to the buyer if they file this complaint and they see that judgment was placed and they're now responsible for these taxes? It can take up to a year in order for that to come to fruition, which is why I wanted to show you guys that this was filed in 2020. Something was arranged in 2021. One thing that they did recommend, if we do have a board of revision complaint or an active complaint filed or something pending, as listing agents on the residential property disclosure, advising our clients to add a note under the L section, which I think is the assessment section, stating that there's a pending board of revision case. Okay. All right, so contract clauses. There's a couple in here. The first one was a really good clause that I think well represents a buyer. So basically it states, okay, it noted that the property is located within, this was the South Side Community Reinvestment Area. So specifying what community reinvestment area the property sat in, and may otherwise be eligible for tax abatement. Sellers shall pursue the tax abatement and is responsible for all required submissions and documentation for the tax abatement application, being contingent upon the buyer's satisfactory review of the complete tax abatement package, phase 1 and phase 2, within a certain amount of time after acceptance. So this buyer agent's saying you had to apply for it and we get to review it. And then having a certain amount of time after receipt to review. In the event that the seller did not deliver these documents or the buyer is not satisfied, the buyer shall be able to terminate. So this is kind of like prove it. I want to see that tax abatement application. I want to make sure you have all the required documentation, and just vetting to ensure that before we move forward with anything else, it truly is going to be submitted and eligible. Seller cooperating with the buyer on any subsequent request from the city regarding tax abatement package. This includes but is not limited to requests for documentation, information, resubmission of initial package. So again, if the city comes back 9 months from now and asks for something, this is asking for seller cooperation. I would ask your broker about how enforceable that piece is post-closing. And then it says if seller fails to cooperate with the buyer, buyer shall have the right to complete requests from the city, and seller shall be responsible for any costs incurred by the buyer. So it's kind of basically setting the tone of, if you're going to file for tax abatement, we want to see the tax abatement. We want proof that it was submitted. We want all copies of all the documentation, because it's pretty common that the city will come back 6, 9, 12 months later and ask for something. That's why I always say take a copy of the check as well, because they always come back and ask for double payment for some reason. I think they just try to catch up. And then on a listing side, so when a lot of times I just get a one statement clause that says, from a buyer's agent, that says seller will apply for tax abatement. That's all that it says. There's really no parameters, whatever, around it. Or sometimes I'll get something that says contingent upon the property being tax abated.
Right, that's the one, big one.
And I'm like, well, it's not going to be tax
prove
abated.
that.
Yeah, I can't prove that. So one of the clauses that I use, that Lori and I kind of put together when working in these areas to represent sellers, is the seller agrees to apply for the CRA tax incentive abatement phase 1 and 2 with the city of Columbus prior to closing. So I always know that I will make sure we get this done prior to closing. So if there's anything that we need to follow up with the city on, or any loose ends that we need to tie up during the contract phase, we can. I always note that this contract is not contingent upon approval or for full tax abatement approval of the city.
Right, and then in our conversations with our agent, we can explain, because it's a 9 and 12 month process, we're selling this place in the next month. You know, we feel good about our due diligence and everything we've done in the application, but we can't guarantee that they're going to say, all right.
Yeah, I can't guarantee what the decision of the city is going to be a year from now. And my seller I can't advise them to put themselves in a liability position for that either. So those were all of our thoughts, resources, things like that. We went through a lot of different things as far as websites. I showed you guys a lot of different websites. We talked about eligibility. So Michelle, her contact information is on like the front and center of any of those tax incentive websites with the city. So she is a great resource.
Very responsive too. I email her and she gets back with that same day, typically within a few hours.
And she's been doing this pretty much the whole time we've been working in these areas. So this hasn't been a turn and burn position. She's been in place throughout all of this. Talked about Franklin County permit lookup. We talked about contract clauses. We talked about financing opportunities and how to market those with your listing or utilize those for your buyers. I wanted to kind of just spend 10 minutes, open up the floor and give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions of Chris and myself. I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, and I did mention too that to Lisa and Ruth that I would walk through kind of what I did with the situation you brought up. I could do that just quickly. Because I know you mentioned you had family or kids or clients that were looking in those areas and it concerned you. So I had a client this last year who was in her mid-20s, single female, wanted to live in Southern Orchards or Franklinton. And her dad was looking with her and took me aside and said, I don't want her living here. So, wanting me to direct her away from these areas, which we all know is a red flag, right? So since he's looking with her, I made the suggestion, well, let's look in some of those areas because she's seen them online and they're a bright, shiny penny, but she hasn't been down there. So we go down and we look at a few. And she loved the house, but she's seeing a really bad, some more in some pretty bad, rough areas, transitional areas. And the more she started questioning it and asking me questions, I said, well, yeah, it is a high transition area. Let's look at some of these others that we pulled in Old Town East. So then we go up there and she's like, okay, well, I like this a little better, but she sees it's a little costlier. So I then got her looking at some in Clintonville and it was still in her price range. And it was a fixer upper, but she ended up making the decision that she didn't feel comfortable living there. I think, and her dad was completely happy with how that went down. I think if I'd have said, if he'd have just told her, I don't want you living here, then sometimes there's that pushback of, well, now I definitely want to live here. So I think it was nice to kind of walk them through it, and let them see some of that, because we can see these online and they look beautiful. But if you drive down to it and it's beautiful, but next door looks like they're still selling crack, I mean, just being honest, sometimes that can, that's going to make your buyer say, I don't want to go there. So family's different. You can say what you want to them, but as agents, we can't, and it's how we do
Everybody's
it.
tolerance is different.
Yeah.
Everybody, they get to make their own decisions. So it's not my job. If I wouldn't live there, it's not my job to make the decision for them. So really allowing them, why don't you drive through? Why don't you see what's around the area? Make sure you're comfortable if this is where you're going home every night.
Yeah.
Letting them do some of that due diligence, because they're like, oh, my friends are moving down here. They say it's a good opportunity. All they think is like, I'm going to make money if I own a house down here. And a lot of them actually have.
Yeah.
We've had some clients really have some great appreciation over the last couple of years. But letting them make their
Right.
own decisions and using some of these tools that we talked about today, or letting them, we call it kind of like an exploratory phase. Like, go explore.
Yeah.
See if you like the lifestyle. See if you like the area. Do your research on the area. See what's coming to town. We let them kind of dibble dabble, and everybody's tolerance level is totally different.
Right.
They love the mix, the urban, the vibe, the
Right,
whatever.
exactly. They want that urban vibe. I had another client
Their
that's a
parents may not,
relocation,
but
and she's happy to be down there. She bought a $250,000 beautiful. This house would be 400 grand somewhere else. She has 3 ginormous dogs. She pulls in. She's got a privacy fence around the yard. She pulls in her, and she stays mostly at home at night. She doesn't do anything that she doesn't feel comfortable doing, but she loves it. And she knows she's going to make money. So.
Well, I think, keeping our personal perspectives out of things,
Yeah.
and kind of providing the facts and the evidence and what we as agents can provide, and allowing them to do some of their own personal due diligence and whether or not it's the right place for them. And again, looking at how the city tiers those areas, all those areas are going to feel different. Whether you're on the Near East Side, whether you're in Old Town East, Old Oak, Southern Orchards, Franklinton, Hilltop, they're all different areas of the city and they all have different things to offer. So letting them spend some time. I think people move so quick sometimes that we don't coach them on spending some time like exploring and learning about where they want to be and what they want to do.
Same goes with investors. I'll tell them, investors will always ask me, would you invest in that area? And I'll tell them my opinion. No, because I invest in another area. It has nothing to do with me not liking that area. It's just I focus somewhere else. So every investor's incentives are different too, and what they're looking for. So, again, I use words like transitional. If they rather see what they consider a safer area for their investment, well, then they have to understand they're not going to get the returns. Cap rates go with risk. You're going to get a higher cap rate return in a riskier area. That's just reality. So investors should know that, and I can educate them on that. But again, I'm not going to tell them where they should invest. I'm just going to give my experience on it.
So any questions, thoughts, takeaways? You're muted, Carol.
This,
It's been a huge learning experience. Thank you.
Mhm. It really has. There, you guys just gave us a wealth of information here, and I thank you. I really appreciate it.
Good, we're happy to. And like I said, nobody's teaching this and nobody's talking about this. And sometimes that investment sector of the marketplace can feel a little, I don't know how to describe it, a little sticky and a little shady and a little questionable, and it can be very much so. And the people that operate in that space, because a lot of times they fly in, they want to make a buck and they want to fly out. But being true professionals in real estate and being about our clients and making sure we're properly representing them, these are the things that we really need to know. And we've learned so much over the last 1-2 years that it's so important to share. And nobody else, at least I haven't seen anybody else teach on it. Probably because it doesn't do them any favors.
Right.
It makes listing agents' jobs harder when they're listing investment properties. It makes buyers agents' jobs harder when they're representing their buyers, because sometimes you're going to have to let them know that these things aren't in place and this might not be the right house for them. And I don't think people are putting those things first.
I agree. And we're all trying to build our business for repeat clients, not a bunch of one-time clients, right? And if we're not making them repeat clients because we didn't do this, and then they're going to remember that, then how many, with everything ethically aside, that's not even good business, right? You want to represent them well and get them back. You want them to see you as a partner going forward.
And you want them to be successful.
Yeah.
Like, I want you to be a successful homeowner. I don't want you to think about the first house that you bought with us and we didn't tell you these things, or you felt like we didn't tell you these things, or we didn't know enough to be able to have these conversations with you. So I think it's really important to be true professionals and provide a lot of value to your clients, because this is what helps you grow your business in the right way.
Hey, good job, Rach and Chris. Just a reminder that this wonderful class is brought to you by the Career Development Committee of your 2021 ALC. Okay, started out with a bang. Okay, in case anybody would like to piggyback or try to ride their coattails, we're looking for some volunteers, so you'll be hearing from us. Way to make us look good, though. Thank you, guys.
Yep, and we're working on moving this to a actual CE when I'm back from leave. So hopefully we'll be able to teach this a couple more times this year, even outside the Market Center. But we really wanted to start in-house to provide Keller Williams Capital Partners some inside knowledge on this subject, so that you guys can be awesome, be better than all the other agents out there. So, okay, thank you guys for coming. Thank you. I will have the front desk send out some resources to everybody that attended, so that you guys have the information that you need. And we're always happy to be a resource if you need anything else. Okay, thanks guys. See ya.
Thank you.